The wind at the Nearland Range doesn't just blow. It claws at your eyes and fills your throat with grit. Chief Brodie thought the desert would break her. He pointed to a rusted truck axle, nearly 2 miles out. "Pick any target," he laughed. He really shouldn't have laughed. Equality doesn't exist at 110 degrees in the shade. Riley Connors knew this better than anyone in the platoon. The sun beating down on the Imperial Valley dirt didn't care what congressional committee had signed off on her presence. And the 65 pounds of gear digging into her traps didn't weigh less just because she was the first woman to make it this far. Gravity is merciless, so is the desert. She lay prone in the dust, the canvas shooting mat radiating heat up through her uniform, baking her chest and stomach. Sweat pooled in the hollow of her throat, picking up the fine, talcum-like sand that blew constantly across the ridge. It tasted like copper and old pennies. She kept her right eye welded to the scope of the Macmillan TAS 338, her left eye open, reading the mirage dancing off the scrub brush. "Wind is full value from the left," her spotter, Michael, muttered beside her. He was 23, built like a fire hydrant, and currently trying very hard not to look like he was babying her. Gusting to 12, maybe 14. "I see it," Riley said. Her voice was flat, raspy. She hadn't drank water in 2 hours. Directly behind them stood Chief Brodie. Brodie was a relic from the early days of Fallujah, a man whose knees clicked when he walked, and who viewed the world through a lens of absolute, uncompromising utility. He didn't hate Riley. Hate required an emotional investment Brodie wasn't willing to give. Instead, he carried a deep, exhausting skepticism. He viewed her as a bureaucratic experiment, a ticking clock of inevitable failure waiting to happen on his range. He didn't yell. Yelling was for boot camp. Brodie just watched, his silence heavier than any reprimand. He had spent the last 3 weeks running the sniper candidates into the ground, waiting for her to snap. He waited for the physical toll to finally break through her stubbornness. He watched her blistered heels bleed through her socks during the rucks. He watched her struggle to haul the heavy barricades into position. She always managed it, but it was ugly, desperate work. The men did it with brute force. Riley had to use leverage and momentum, expending twice the energy. "You're dragging your trigger, Connors," Brodie said. His voice was a low gravel rumble over the howling wind. "You're anticipating the recoil. I can see your shoulder tensing from 5 feet away." Riley didn't break her cheek weld. She just breathed out. "Correcting, Chief." "Don't correct it. Stop doing it." Brodie took a slow drag from a battered canteen, swishing the warm water around his mouth before spitting it into the dust. "The rifle is a tool. You're treating it like a loaded rattlesnake. If you can't handle the kick, say the word. Nobody here is going to judge you for tapping out. We all know the human body has limits." There it was. The out. He offered it to her at least twice a day. It was never framed as an insult. It was always framed as common sense. We all know the human body has limits. The unspoken addendum hung in the dry air. Especially yours. Riley hated the pity. She could handle the hostility from some of the younger guys, the side-eyes in the chow hall, the abrupt end to conversations when she walked into the armory. That was just ego, but Brodie's pity was insidious. It seeped into her own mind when she was exhausted, whispering that maybe he was right. Maybe she was trying to force a square peg into a round hole. She shifted her hips, digging her toes into the dirt to stabilize her platform. The Macmillan was heavy, a precision instrument built for reaching out and touching something over a mile away. It didn't care about politics. It only cared about physics. Pressure, drag, gravity, wind. The math was pure. It was the only thing out here that didn't look at her differently. "Target is the white steel at 800, Michael said, reading the laminated range card taped to his spotting scope. "Elevation is come up, 3.2 mils. Riley reached up, her fingers finding the cold, knurled dial of the elevation turret. She didn't look. She felt the clicks. Click, click, click. She adjusted for the wind. "Send it when ready," Michael said. Riley inhaled, letting the hot air fill her lungs, expanding her ribcage against the dirt. She let it out slowly. At the bottom of her breath, where her heartbeat slowed, she found the wall of the trigger. She didn't pull. She added pressure, steadily, until the rifle surprised her. Crack! The recoil punched into her shoulder, a familiar, bruising impact. The muzzle brake violently vented the expanding gases, kicking up a cloud of dust that temporarily obscured the target. Riley racked the bolt, the heavy brass casing ejecting and clinking against the rocks. She settled immediately back onto the target. "Impact," Michael said. It was a dull, flat statement. "Center mass." A second later, the faint ping of lead hitting steel drifted back to them. "Good," Brody said. He didn't sound impressed. 800 yards is a warm-up. If you can't hit 800, you're stealing oxygen. Move to the 1200-yard line. You have 2 minutes. Riley scrambled up, grabbing the heavy rifle by the chassis. Her legs burned. The muscles in her lower back screamed in protest. She ignored them, keeping her face perfectly blank, and began the trudge to the next firing line. She was tired of proving she belonged. She just wanted to shoot. The 1200-yard line was perched on a jagged lip of rock that exposed the shooters to the full brunt of the desert wind. Down in the valley, the heat thermals were churning violently, creating a washing machine effect that made reading the wind nearly impossible. The dust devils danced through the scrub, completely unpredictable. Brody gathered the remaining 6 candidates. 5 men, 1 woman. They all looked haggard, their faces smeared with camouflage paint and dirt, eyes hollowed out by sleep deprivation. "Standard quail is out the window," Brody announced, pacing slowly behind them. "You've all proven you can hit a stationary target in optimal conditions. Congratulations. You're marginally better than a weekend hunter in a deer blind. But optimal conditions don't exist in combat. The enemy doesn't stand still, and the weather doesn't care about your dope book." He stopped at the edge of the ridge, pointing out across the vast, empty expanse of the valley. "Forget the painted steel," Brody said. He raised his arm, pointing toward a distant ridge that looked like nothing more than a hazy blur through the heat distortion. "Look past the designated range, way past it. See the canyon mouth? The old dry wash?" Michael lifted his binoculars. Riley didn't need them. She put her eye to the scope and dialed the magnification up. The glass cut through the glare. "I see it," Michael said. "Looks like junk, old farm equipment." "It's an old tractor axle," Brody confirmed. "Rusted solid, left out there maybe 40 years ago. It's roughly 1,850 yards from where we are standing." A low murmur rippled through the candidates. 1,850 yards, over a mile. The TAC 338 was capable of it, certainly, but hitting a target that size, maybe 2 feet wide and irregularly shaped, in this crosswind was a gamble. A heavy gamble. Brody turned around, his eyes scanning the exhausted faces. They finally settled on Riley. A faint, knowing smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't malicious. It was the smile of a teacher about to deliver a painful but necessary lesson. "Connors," Brody said, "you're up first." Riley felt the eyes of the 5 other men shift to her. Nobody said a word. The silence was thick, suffocating. "Chief," Michael started, shifting uncomfortably. That target isn't on the card. We don't have accurate range data for that backstop, and the wind down in the wash is totally unpredictable. It's a low percentage shot for anyone. I know, Brody said, his eyes never leaving Riley. But Connors here has been fighting tooth and nail to prove she belongs in a Tier 1 unit. Tier 1 operators don't take high percentage shots, Michael. They take the shots nobody else can make. If she wants to play at this level, she needs to perform at this level. He crossed his arms, stepping back to give her room. Pick any target, Connors, Brody laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Actually hit that axle. End the argument. Prove the brass right for putting you here. It was a setup. Brody knew it. Michael knew it. The other candidates knew it. Brody was giving her an impossible task, so that when she missed, the failure would be spectacularly public. It would finally break her composure. It would give him the excuse to sit her down, look her in the eye, and give her the, "You tried your best, but this ain't for you" speech. Riley looked at the dirt. She looked at the heavy rifle. Her shoulder ached, a deep, throbbing pulse of pain that kept time with her heart. She walked to the firing line and dropped onto the mat. She didn't slam the rifle down. She didn't move with angry, jerky motions. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, settling into the dirt as if she were sinking into a mattress. She spread her legs, flattening her feet, anchoring herself to the earth. She pulled the rifle tightly into her pocket, resting her cheek against the stock. "Michael," she said quietly. "Range me." Michael dropped down beside her, pressing his eye to the spotting scope. He spent a long, agonizing minute dialing the focus, reading the terrain. "Range is 1,862 yards, Michael said, his voice tight with concentration. "Angle is relatively flat, but the wind... Riley, it's a mess. We've got a crosswind at our position, blowing left to right at 10. Down in the valley, it's swirling. I'm seeing dust kick up right to left near the target. It's a headwind halfway down the flight path." "Give me a call," she said. "I can't," Michael admitted, his voice dropping so Brody couldn't hear. "It's a guess, a crapshoot. I'd hold 2 mils left, but honestly, it could blow 3 feet the other way before it gets there." "Okay," Riley said. She closed her eyes. She shut out Brody's presence. She shut out the aching in her back. She stopped thinking about the congressional mandates, the angry whispers in the chow hall, the terrifying weight of being the first. None of that mattered to the bullet. The bullet didn't have a gender. The bullet was just a piece of metal waiting for instructions. She opened her eyes and looked through the glass. She didn't look at the target. She looked at the air between her and the target. She watched the way the mirage rippled. She watched a tiny, dry bush trembling 1,000 yards out. She watched the dust. She reached up and dialed her elevation, 18.4 mils up. She didn't touch the windage knob. She was going to hold for the wind using the reticle. "I'm holding 2.5 left," Riley whispered. "It's a gamble," Michael breathed. "Send it," she said. She inhaled. The hot air burned her nostrils. She let it out. Her chest sank into the dirt. The crosshairs, floating over the desolate, swirling valley, settled on a patch of empty space to the left of the rusted metal. She hit the wall of the trigger. "We all know the human body has limits," Brody's voice echoed in her memory. Her finger pressed back. The rifle roared. The violent kick pushed her backward, but she rode the recoil perfectly, keeping her eye glued to the scope, fighting through the dust kicked up by the muzzle brake. "Shot out," Michael said instinctively. Now came the waiting. At 1,800 yards, the bullet would take nearly 3 full seconds to reach the target. 3 seconds of dead, empty silence on the ridge. 1. Riley watched the trace. the visible distortion in the air caused by the bullet's supersonic wake, arching high into the sky, fighting the crosswinds. 2. The trace began to drop, plummeting down toward the canyon mouth, getting pushed aggressively to the right by the unseen thermal drafts. 3. Through the scope, a tiny, violent puff of orange rust exploded off the very center of the axle. A heavy, breathless silence hung over the ridge. Nobody moved. The 5 candidates behind her were frozen. Michael had his mouth slightly open, his eye still glued to the spotting scope. 2 seconds later, the sound carried back to them on the wind. Clang. It was a sharp, distinct ring of heavy metal, a definitive, brutal punctuation mark. Riley didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She didn't look back at Brody. She smoothly racked the bolt back, ejected the spent brass, fed a fresh round into the chamber, and settled her eye right back into the scope. "Impact," Michael whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Dead center." Riley exhaled, her finger hovering over the trigger. "Give me another target, Chief." Behind her, the wind howled across the rocks. Chief Brody stood perfectly still, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at the dust settling in the valley. He looked at the perfect textbook posture of the shooter on the mat. The tired amusement was completely gone from his face. The argument was over. Nobody talked about the shot at Chow that night. The silence in the mess tent wasn't hostile anymore. It was the heavy, contemplative quiet of men recalibrating their reality. Riley ate her powdered eggs and drank 3 canteens of lukewarm water. Her shoulder was mottled purple. Her lower back felt like a frayed cable. She didn't look at the other candidates, and they didn't look at her. Respect in this world wasn't a congratulatory pat on the back. It was the sudden absence of doubt, but Brody wasn't paid to be convinced by a single bullet. The next morning, the rifle range was gone. In its place was the stalking phase. Shooting a rifle at 1,800 yards was a mathematical equation. Sneaking up to within 200 yards of trained observers in a barren, sun-scorched desert without being seen was an act of sustained, agonizing physical torture. The temperature peaked at 112 by noon. Riley lay flat on her stomach in the dust, encased in a heavy canvas ghillie suit covered in shredded burlap and local vegetation. Inside the suit, the heat was suffocating. It felt like breathing through a wet wool blanket inside an oven. Sweat stung her eyes, blurring her vision, but she couldn't reach up to wipe it away. Movement was death. Through the thick weave of her boonie hat, she watched the observation tower 250 yards away. Brody stood on the catwalk, heavy Swarovski binoculars pressed to his face, dissecting the terrain grid by grid. Below him, 3 instructors, the walkers, paced the scrub brush with radios, waiting for Brody to guide them onto a careless student. Riley was currently 80 yards from her starting point. It had taken her 3 hours to get here. She wasn't crawling. Crawling was too fast. She was skull-dragging. She pushed the toe of her right boot into the dirt, tensed her right thigh, and shifted her body weight exactly 1 inch forward. She held it. She waited 10 seconds, letting the surrounding brush settle. Then she dug her left toe in, another inch. The drag bag containing her sniper rifle was tethered to her ankle, sliding through the dust with agonizing slowness. To her left, about 50 yards away, the radio crackled on a walker's hip. "Walker, shift left. Grid Alpha 4. I got a bush that wasn't there 10 minutes ago." Brody's voice, filtered through the comms, was devoid of emotion. Riley stopped breathing. She flattened herself further, pressing her cheek into the baking earth, closing her eyes to hide the white sclera. "Copy. Moving to Alpha 4. The walker's heavy boots crunched through the dry sage. A loud groan echoed across the wash. "Stand up, Miller," the walker barked. "You look like a walking tumbleweed. You're dead. Go back to the truck." Riley heard the heavy, defeated sigh of Candidate Miller as he stood up, shedding his camouflage netting. That was 3 down. 3 men whose patience had fractured under the baking sun, prompting them to move just a fraction too fast. Patience is a weapon, she told herself. Heat is just a sensation. Her right calf cramped. It didn't start as a dull ache. It hit her like a hammer, a violent, seizing knot of muscle that twisted her leg and sent a spike of white-hot agony straight up her spine. Dehydration. She had drank water, but the ghillie suit was sweating it out of her, faster than her body could absorb it. Her immediate, primal instinct was to jerk her leg up, to grab the calf and massage the knot. If she did, the burlap on her back would sway. Brody would see it. She would fail. Riley bit down on her bottom lip until she tasted blood. She forced her leg to remain perfectly limp, letting the muscle tear and spasm against the bone. She squeezed her eyes shut, silent tears of sheer, blinding pain leaking into the dirt. She focused on the smell of the crushed creosote bush beneath her nose. She counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. It took 4 agonizing minutes for the cramp to subside into a dull, throbbing ache. She opened her eyes. The tower was still there. The walkers were still pacing. She dug her left toe into the dirt. She pushed. 1 inch. The physical pain was manageable. It was the psychological isolation that broke people out here. You were entirely alone in your own head, trapped in a roasting canvas bag, moving at the speed of a dying snail, constantly hunted. Every shadow looked like an instructor. Every breeze felt like it was exposing your position. Brody was actively looking for her. She knew it. He had mentally dismissed the others. He wanted to see if the woman who could shoot the wings off a fly at a mile had the feral, rat-like endurance to survive the dirt. 2 hours later, the sun began to dip toward the jagged ridgeline, casting long, deceptive shadows across the desert floor. The wind died down. The heat remained, trapped in the rocks, radiating upward. Riley had closed the distance. She was 180 yards from the tower. This was the final firing position. The FFP. She slowly, methodically, reached back and untied the drag bag from her ankle. It took her 10 minutes to pull the rifle out, keeping the weapon perfectly parallel to the ground, ensuring the matte black barrel didn't catch a stray glint of the dying sun. She slid the rifle forward, pushing it through a thick cluster of dry sage. She built her position. She didn't use the bipod. The legs would be too visible. She rested the chassis on the soft canvas of her drag bag, burying the muzzle deep within the shadows of the brush. She pressed her eye to the scope. Through the glass, the observation tower was crystal clear. Brody was leaning against the railing, his binoculars hanging from his neck. He was holding a small white placard with a black number painted on it. He switched the numbers every 5 minutes. To pass, a candidate had to read the number, call it in, fire a blank round, and remain completely undetected by the walkers. The number was 7. Riley slowly brought her left hand up to her chest rig, depressing the push-to-talk button on her radio. She kept the microphone pressed tight against her throat to muffle the sound. "Sierra 2, she whispered. Her voice was unrecognizable, a cracked, dry rasp. "Target acquired. Number is 7. A pause on the radio. Then Brody's voice. "Copy, Sierra 2. Send it." Riley settled behind the rifle. She checked her natural point of aim. She breathed out. Click! The dry fire of the blank round sounded deafening to her own ears. But in the open desert, it was barely a pop. "Shot out," she whispered. "I heard the pop," Brody transmitted. He raised his binoculars, scanning the brush precisely where the sound had originated. "Walker, move to my 12 o'clock, range 180. Look for the muzzle blast." The crunch of boots, fast this time. The walker wasn't casually strolling. He was zeroing in. Riley didn't pull her rifle back. She simply closed her scope caps with a soft click and lowered her head, pressing her face entirely into the dirt. She became a rock. She became a dead piece of sage. She stopped being human. The boots grew louder. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They stopped. Riley could smell him. She smelled the Copenhagen wintergreen tobacco. She smelled the fresh CLP oil on his sidearm. The walker was standing less than 3 feet from her head. "I'm at 180, Chief," the walker said, his voice booming over her. "I don't see anything, just dead brush and rocks." "Look harder," Brody's voice cracked over the walker's shoulder radio. "She's right there. I heard the pop from that grid." The walker took a step forward. The toe of his combat boot pressed against the burlap netting draped over Riley's shoulder. She didn't flinch. Her heart hammered against her ribs, threatening to crack them. The instinct to pull away from the heavy boot was overwhelming. A fraction of an inch of movement, a sharp intake of breath, and it would be over. Everything, the pain, the 1,800-yard shot, the blistering rucks, the silent endurance, wiped away by a single twitch. She went perfectly, totally numb. She willed her heartbeat to slow. She let the heat of the earth absorb her. The boot stayed resting against her shoulder for 10 seconds. The walker was scanning the horizon, looking right over her. "Chief," the walker said, stepping back. The pressure left her shoulder. "There's nothing here. I'm stepping on empty dirt. She's a ghost." A long silence hung over the radio. Riley kept her eyes closed. "All right," Brody finally said. His voice sounded different. The gravelly edge was still there, but the cynical exhaustion was gone. "Sierra 2, stand up." Riley didn't move quickly. Her muscles were locked, her joints stiff from 6 hours of agonizing tension. She slowly pushed herself up onto her knees, the burlap netting falling away from her face. She reached up and pulled off the boonie hat. Her face was a mask of dirt, sweat, and camouflage paint. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. The walker, standing 10 feet away, jumped slightly as she materialized from the flat earth. He stared at her, wide-eyed, then looked down at his own boots. Brody was watching her through the binoculars. He lowered them slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a thumbs up. He simply keyed his radio. "Target neutralized, Sierra 2. Secure your gear. Fall back to the trucks." It was the most mundane, ordinary command he could have given. And it was exactly what she wanted. There was no special praise. There was no concession speech about how she had proven him wrong. He was giving her the exact same orders he would give any other SEAL who had just successfully executed a stalk. The pity was gone. The argument was over. Riley packed her rifle into the drag bag. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her chest felt light. She stood up, the heavy gear settling familiarly onto her bruised shoulders, and began the long walk back to the trucks. She didn't look back at the tower. She didn't need to. The desert was still hot, the wind was still blowing, and gravity was still merciless. But for the first time since she arrived at Nyland, she wasn't fighting the desert. She was part of it. If this story grabbed you, don't let it be the last one you hear. Hit that like button to support the channel and share it with someone who appreciates gritty, no-nonsense storytelling. Want more intense, grounded drama? Subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload. Your support keeps these stories alive. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken the shot or survived the stalk? Let us know, and we'll see you next time.